Hey there, welcome to History Chats. We're doing some reruns. This is not a live program. I'm recording this well in advance here to introduce this. Yeah, Gary and I'm Ben Clark. I guess I haven't been saying that necessarily, but me and Gary have been doing History Chats since September of 2020. Doing one every week, pretty much, with the exception of a couple holidays here and there. And yeah, we thought it would be a good time to maybe step away for a little bit, catch our breath, and maybe even take some vacation time on a Thursday for the first time in a long time. So hopefully you're all right with that, and just let you know we're going to be showing some stuff if for whatever reason you've seen this already, or don't want to see it again. That's all right too. But we wanted to make sure that take the opportunity to maybe showcase some programs that people didn't get a chance to see, and also to record a little bit of explanation, maybe behind the scenes about what we choose and, the process. So today, I thought this would be good to feature, this is a program that Gary did back in August of 2022 as part of a kind of 2-month series where we did a month about the unincorporated places or some unincorporated places in Marathon County. And then we did one on another month on villages. Some of the smaller villages too. We wanted to really, so one of the things that we do here we are the Marathon County Historical Society. So we are not despite being in Wausau and despite there being, an unfortunate perception sometimes among, especially out in the county, that we are the Wausau Historical Society, but we're not. We are the County Historical Society. The problem is that we don't necessarily always have a great way to tie in. We always try to tie in as much of the county as possible, but if you're going to be talking about certain topics, we just have a lot more of Wausau represented, both because of it being the center of the most population throughout our history. It's just been here. And the fact that we are located here means that it's a lot easier for people to donate stuff, take it down the street versus driving, 30 minutes to give it to us. And so consequently, we try to be conscious of the fact that, we don't want to just tell Wausau stories all the time. But when it comes to, if, for an example, if we're putting an exhibit together, we don't really do like the history of Wausau. But if we did, that would be a lot easier to do than, say, the history of Elderon or Ponatuski, these places that exist and they're great and they have their own history, but we just don't have the material. And it would be kind of like stretching the information to make like a full-on exhibit about Hatley. Maybe we could do it. But it's also kind of limited to that community. Like, I don't know that everybody would want to go see, let's go see the history of Hatley. This is getting me into speculation, so I'm gonna step away from that. I'm sure it would be very fun if we did it. It's just, it becomes a logistical challenge, and yet it's something that we need to be conscious of. And so when Gary and I sit down to come up with programs, we try to make sure that we don't just talk about Wausau folks as much as possible, but sometimes those are the ones that we have ready to go because we have the photographs, we've got the story already. So I thought that, it would be kind of a nice opportunity to spotlight some of these communities that just don't get their story told for whatever reason. The smaller villages and these unincorporated places are, those crossroads that you see as you're driving through the county that aren't cities, they're not villages, they're not incorporated, but it's just a gathering point for a community. And they have really interesting stories. They just don't necessarily lend themselves to larger form content. And doing a 15, 20, 30-minute program is a perfect amount of time to tell a story and sort of explain that community. And as we hoped, I think a lot of these got a lot of traction because, if you are from Knowlton and you see a program about Knowlton, you're like, oh, that's very, don't get to see that very often. And for our purposes, it kind of lets us dig into, like, I didn't know very much about Knowlton when I did my program on Knowlton or Fenwood or, some of these communities, and or when Gary did, Hatley. You know a little bit, but it gives the sort of push to really dig in and uncover a story and tell a story of part of our community that we don't talk about very often. So we wanted to make sure that we had some of that. And I think Gary did a great job talking about Hatley here. This is one of the programs that was part of that, and didn't necessarily get as much views as some of the other ones did, which, again, that's always fine. So here's another chance to see that and to kind of get an experience of one of the programs we did last year. And I'm sure we'll come back to this kind of approach in the future. I think this is definitely a format that is in a good place to be flushed out and reused in other places. So if you have suggestions for the future of parts of the county that you don't get talking about very much, but you might want to see a program on, that would be very interesting to know what people want to see. So, but for now, this is a rerun. Can't do anything new. We'll stick with what the old one was. Hopefully, you stick around and enjoy. And if you've seen it before, or whatever, and you want to click away, no big deal. We'll be back with more live history, some new stuff in the near future. In the meantime, I hope you are having a wonderful time yourself, and I'm sure, we'll see you next time. See you next time. I'm going to kick it over to Gary. Take it away, Gary.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. So today we talk about Hatley, but before we talk about Hatley as such, I want to review a little bit of the history here. The Village of Hatley, 1850, settlement begins, 1879. We'll talk about the Milwaukee Lakeshore and Western coming in, 1881, a post office established, and December 3rd, 1912, Hatley incorporated as a village. So villages, as last month we talked about unincorporated places in Marathon County. This month we talk about corporate. So they incorporated, Village of Hatley incorporated as a village. So there are villages, which we'll talk about this month. Then there's cities, which would be larger places. And then there are towns. We've talked about towns. We'll have a little refresher on towns. But in Marathon County, just so that you can have a sense of the villages of Marathon County, there's Athens, Burnwood, Dorchester, Edgar, Eldron, Fenwood, Hatley, Cronowetter, Maine, Marathon City, Rockchild, Spencer, Stratford, Unity, and Weston. Those are villages. And the villages are governed pretty much like a board. They may have a president of the board. They are organized pretty much like a city, pretty much like a town which has a board and a president, and that's pretty much their governance. So like cities, there's a variety of ways of village governance. But it's all governed by Wisconsin statutes, of course. So that's all outlined by Wisconsin statutes, how you're governed, that is governed. So villages, cities, and towns are all governed basically by Wisconsin statutes. So villages are a category, and we're going to be talking about 4 of those villages this month. So just a little bit of a background. There's smaller communities, a little bit more than a Crossroads or communities that we've been talking about, for instance, last month. So let's begin. Hatley. Hatley is located in the eastern part of Marathon County. It's over there off of 29 in the town of Norrie. So the town of Norrie is, that's 6 by 6 miles. That's the town. Township 28, range 10. And Hatley sits there you can see it sitting there on the left, not far from a little community of Norrie, which almost is on the border of to the east of Shawano. So we're coming close to the end of Marathon County to the east. So here's Hatley. So in 1882, we can start to see Hatley showing up on the map. Now this is, you can see the railroad coming in from the east, coming past Norway. I'll talk a little bit about that. but here it's, so there is a little bit of a settlement. It's not just in context of my Bavent story, the population, which included at this point in time some Polish people moving up from the south of Portage County. They kept moving up a little bit to the north here in the town of Norrie, creating this little settlement of Hatley already on the map in 1882. But excuse me, the settlement of this territory, of this part of Marathon County, was coming up, just like Bavent coming up from Portage County. The Stevens Point area started to feed people up into this part of Marathon County. And one of those inhabitants was Matthew Waldy, I'm sorry. And this is the little note in the Stevens Point Journal, 1905, speaking about Matthew Waldy, was born in the town of Hatley, County of Stansted, Province of Quebec, Canada, in September of 1821. So that's one of the mysteries. So the mystery of how Hatley came to be is because Mr. Waldy, who was one of the early settlers of this part of Marathon County, and one of the early, like I said, settlers, called this little settlement Hatley, coming from his hometown up in Canada. So the history of, so this was natural lumber country. Some of the early people coming into this part of Marathon County were here for the lumber, mostly hardwood. A little bit later, not so much of the white pine that we'll see in the northern and western parts of Marathon County, mostly in the some hardwoods, some, of course, some softwoods also. And one of the large lumber companies was this Fenwood Lumber. If you look at a variety of plat books throughout this era, you'll see that Fenwood Lumber did really own a lot of land around here. And this reference to this 1899 article saying that this Fenwood Lumber, who was pretty much owned by Wausau businessmen, bought out the 4,020 acres of land near Hatley. So again, they were starting to come into this part of Marathon County for the lumber. Like I said, mostly hardwood, but also, and then that would be establishing the planing mill and a variety of other sawmills in this area, including Hatley. So in 1900, this is pretty much what Hatley looked like. We see the Big Plover River coming close to it. And then we'll also notice the Chicago and Northwestern and Fenwood Lumber having the large land to the north of what was coming to be called Hatley. The depot. So as Hatley started to grow, as Hatley started to develop, it became quite a little community. You saw the map there of 1900. Soon again, 1912, it would be incorporated. So the population was starting to grow, mostly from the sawmill in this part of, and I let me just back up. So this is basically downtown. So as it continued to grow, of course, this is their new grade school, a fairly substantial grade school. As you know, it's a little bit beyond the one-room schoolhouses that we're quite familiar with. Quite a substantial schoolhouse here in Hatley. And of course, as the community continued to grow, the need for a Hatley hotel All these quite common throughout the communities, villages, and even unincorporated places was a little bit of a hotel. And again, the reason for that would have been the railroad coming in, and we'll speak to that in a few minutes. Again, this is that 1900 map of Hatley. You can see the development a little bit to the south of the, but houses were starting, the community was starting to develop quite a bit. But let's talk about the railroad. You saw the maps of the railroad coming through. The old Milwaukee Lakeshore and Western, starting from the Fox Valley, coming up through Shawano, and then eventually to Eland. And then when they came in the 1880s, they built this, what they would call a branch, what they would call the Wausau Branch, coming west from Eland, which is just across the line into Shawano County, up through Norrie, into Hatley, into Ringgold, into Callan, then up into, to cover the a couple of their sawmills on the Eau Claire River. So this really was a key part of the growth of this part of Marathon County. When these little communities started to have access to the Fox Valley from large cities like Milwaukee and Chicago, that really did provide a big boom to places like Hatley, and that really is one reason why they started to grow a lot. They had the sawmill, they had the wood, and they had the trains and the railroads to bring that product out of this community into the big commerce centers of southern Wisconsin. So eventually the Milwaukee Lakeshore and Western would be bought out by the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. Eventually this line would of course come into Wausau, service a lot of the commerce being generated in Wausau along the riverfront, but then they would continue west through Marathon City, Edgar, Stratford, and then eventually ending up in Marshfield, which would give Hatley the opportunity to tap into the markets of western Wisconsin, and then eventually this line would go all the way to Minneapolis. So again, a great line. A very important part of the growth of Hatley was the railroad. Again, another picture of their depot that you can notice the Hatley sign on the left part of your picture. That sign would eventually end up on top of the new Hatley Library. They took that. This building does not stand anymore, but that token of their railroad era life sits atop the branch of the Marathon County Public Library in Hatley. I can't stress enough the importance of the trains, of the railroads coming through Hatley, going east and west, that brought the product into Hatley, as well as bringing all the product out of Hatley for many years. Of course, eventually, the Chicago Northwestern abandoned these lines, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But an important part of. So, if you've seen my programs in the past, I cannot go much further than having to talk a little bit about the church. St. Florian's Catholic Church, located in Hatley, built and dedicated in 1914. This was not their first church. They had an older church built, I believe, in the 1880s. But this newer church, again, this was the anchor. This was the anchor of that settlement, part Polish community into Hatley, and we saw that in Bavent with St. Ladislaus, and we're seeing that now with St. Florian's in Hatley, and anchored to their community. It's churches throughout Marathon County have been that anchor in these little small communities, and they still prosper, and they are still a major force in community life in these communities. But when the railroads came out, when the railroads stopped being, so then another thing put Hatley on the map. You can see Hatley there coming. You see Eland a little bit on Highway 45 on the left side. You coming up, and then you can see the dotted line a little bit north of Highway 29. That same route of the railroad, starting in Eland, coming through Norrie, Hatley, Ringel, and then on to Wausau, the Mountain Bay Trail, which again comes from Green Bay and continues to Wausau. But again, a very important, the history of this part of Marathon County, it really is in a very important part of this history, bringing new life, really a new recreational life to this part of Marathon County, including Hatley, of course. Just backing up a little bit to Eland, just so that you know, there was another branch, Eland, that the rail that went up to Antigo and parts north, but this Wausau branch, so to speak, coming in from Wausau was a very important, and now it has transitioned into a bike and pedestrian trail along that old rail bed into Green Bay. So that a little bit of a summary of some of the early history of Hatley. I think that this is a small little community that has just so much history. It has so much that has contributed to its culture. It's why it's still there, why it's an important part of Marathon County's history. The railroads, the lumber, some of the early people that were there that gave it its credibility, that saw great potential in this part of Marathon County. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this little brief view of Hatley, a great little community. So take a drive out on Highway 29, and you'll come into this little community of Hatley. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ben.
All right. Yeah. Let's see here. Hey, we have a second webcam. Don't get to use it very often. Why not? Yeah. So that was Hatley, as Gary said. I'm just going to check to see if any comments came in, but I think no questions at this point. I guess I can just let you know that, like Gary said, we're going to be continuing the village theme here, and next week we will be talking about Fenwood. So Fenwood, if you might have noticed the Fenwood Lumber Company being an important early area in the Hatley area. Well, that's going to be, as you might expect, an important part of Fenwood, the village of Fenwood itself as well. So to tune in for next week on that. All right. But I think we're gonna call it there. So yeah, thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time.